Okay, the Sophists and their significance. I asked to do this one specifically. I like this topic quite a bit because of what the Sophists represent. Not so much they themselves, because they have sort of fallen away through history rather than become something of a reaction. We will get there. I will go through this fairly quickly. And I think it's good to then rewatch this later if you want to revisit this objective, if there's too much going on in the next couple of minutes. This is what I will do right now. What is in a name? I will pick a specific one, Protagoras. I will discuss subjectivity, which emerges through his work. What happens if you're a subjectivist? And then, of course, I will address the objective directly. What is the significance of the Sophists? And then lastly, just some final thoughts. So the first is straightforward. Like philosophy, Sophia means wisdom, and so the Sophists like wisdom. Therefore, a sage or an expert could have been a useful translation from their time, whereas today sophistry has a slightly pejorative term, the use of clever but false arguments, typically intentionally to deceive. Why this is the case, we will see in a moment, why this shift of meaning in the word. In general, one can say that it's not a school of thought. So unlike, for example, being a Platonic philosopher, where you are part of the school of Plato and his thought, the Sophists were not really unified in this way. Some things they have in common, but not enough, I think, to make them a formal school of thought. They taught for money. They taught about the successful conduct in life, which means as an individual, also as a citizen, and public speaking. Public speaking was important for them. Greece was then experimenting with democracy. Of course, a tiny portion of people were actually able to indulge in politics, but those who were able to, land-owning men, would have to speak in order to get people to support them. And so rhetoric, public speaking, became an important skill to have, and the Sophists were wanting to do this. We see today, for example, that to persuade someone in the political arena is typically less about facts and more about an emotive response. This is the rhetoric of the Sophists that's used in a negative term today. So let's look at one person particularly, Protagoras, 490 to 420 before the Common Era. He was well known and famous for the argumentation techniques. He made a taxonomy of linguistics, and he was delving into literary theory, which is, I think, amazing. His famous quote, "Man is the measure of all things." In other words, it is subjective. The way things seem to an individual is the way they are, in fact, for that individual. What this means is if the wind feels cold to me and it feels warm to you, then the wind is warm to you and is cold to me. We have two competing truths that don't disqualify one another. How the world appears to me is how the world is to me directly, and how it appears to you is how it is to you.
Just
you can yes.
It sounded like you said, you said if the wind feels cold to me and warm to you, and it sounded like you said it is cold to me and warm to you, but I think it's just what you have here. It is warm to me and cold to you. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, sorry, of course, those should correspond. Absolutely. You can still be wrong, I guess, in this sense. And so this can be expanded to moral judgments. And this is where the difficulty comes in that later philosophers will take great exception with. Is an action right or wrong? And if you simply say, well, it's right for me, but wrong for you because of your views and mine, we lose something about objective goodness, objective truth. And as we saw the previous lesson, the pre-Socratics, they were looking specifically for this kind of objective truth. What is the very heart of the world? We had fire, change, water. Subjectivism says Well, that just depends on your viewpoint, or it depends on where you're coming from, or what you've learned. Many of these sophists were moving teachers. They would move around a lot. They got to know many other kinds of ways of life. This probably inspired them to realize what you think you know and what is true for you depends a whole lot on where you've been, what you've seen, where you've been educated, how you've been educated. And they took that quite seriously. So the justification offered by Protagoras for this view is that there may be no objective truths. This doesn't mean that everything is false. It also doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, right? If you hold on to truth for dear life and you lose it, you're a bit lost. But Protagoras was a little bit more open-minded than that, and he said, sure, there's no objective truth, we can't find it. True false is not the way to look at things, but better worse is perhaps a useful way to look at things. So experts like the sophists can help you. They can show you what is the best in terms of your interest. If you want to win political office, you may not have to use only facts, but if it's more in your interest to gain support to draw upon emotive responses when making a speech, go ahead and do that. And this is obviously a better way to do it than to go up and draw a picture and hope people will vote for you because of your picture drawing. So there is still a sort of judgment going on. It just doesn't depend on objective truths or facts. This remains a bit ambiguous, of course, because as I've asked here, is there a fact about your best interests? What is your best interest? Does this just depend on your viewpoint? This is a bit ambiguous. We won't go into this now. We can also be very positive about Protagoras and take him seriously and say it is perhaps better to take someone else's viewpoint seriously, even if we disagree, because this is a responsible way of doing politics, or it's a modest position which doesn't claim, I know, I'm right, you're wrong if you disagree with me, therefore we should do what I say. So there is a large positivity in that, which I think gets lost over time. To get to then the objective. The significance about the sophists is that they introduced an almost psychological view of philosophy, or knowledge at least, and their point was to convince people. Or how can you convince people? How can you frame, how can you frame your claim? Which language strategies could you employ to convince other people, compared to the pre-Socratics, who were thinking not about human psychology or interiority, but more about the outside world. What is the world made up of? What is the fundamental material of this world? There's also a bridge that was made between pre-Socratics and Socratics. The pre-Socratics did not provide an objective truth as they hoped to do, says the sophists. If we don't have an objective truth, then we can use knowledge for practical goals, said the sophists. And so it's not that we employ logic to get to truth, but we use rhetoric to achieve our own aims. This shifts a little bit the sort of point and motivation of philosophy. In other words, relativism, subjectivism, even strong skepticism were then countered by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The significance of these then is that they influenced this huge trifecta of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. To say, as Socrates did, that I know that I do not know, is not to say that there's no knowledge. It says a lot about knowledge, just the limits of knowledge. Knowledge is possible, just it has limits. So Socrates, in this sense, is not saying there is no truth or we should abandon the quest for truth. He simply says there are limits. And then, of course, the logic-rhetoric debate is incredibly important. This is what I like about the sophists. They highlight this logic-rhetoric debate. Today we have, you can call it modernism versus postmodernism or post-structuralism, but in everyday use, we can say something like the last point here, a motivational quote, right? To be yourself in a world that is constantly changing to make you, that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. This is not bad advice. in principle. It touches your emotions. It's also factually wrong, I would say, for most people. You should try to maybe be better than you were. Or if you're the kind of person who likes to hurt others, then don't be yourself. If the world tries to educate you and change you in this way, accept it, right? So logic is not the way to get to truth in this motivational quote. It doesn't mean the motivational quote is useless. In fact, it can add a lot to us because of its rhetoric value. Poetry can teach us very interesting stuff about life. It can give us insights and wisdom. Strangely, Plato wrote in the form of dialogues. This is not a logical step-by-step treatment, but he uses, of course, rhetorical devices. He touches our emotions to make us slightly more involved in the work. And so, to summarize, the significances of the Sophists is that they turned slightly more inward than outward. They gave a good starting point for Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle to then work against to build their system. They challenged the idea of using logic for truth, and that's all that we should do. And they introduced the very interesting role that rhetoric can offer us for wisdom.